What happens when a man who has everything meets a woman who has lost it all? For Tom Sterling, a titan of industry with a net worth rivaling a small country, the world was his chessboard. The people in it, merely pawns. On the most important night of his life, with a $300 million deal on the line, he saw the waitress serving his table as less than a pawn. She was invisible. But a single act of casual cruelty was about to unravel his empire. He had no idea that this invisible woman held the key to his future, a secret weapon hidden in plain sight, ready to change everything with a few words he could never possibly understand. The air in Midtown Manhattan on that crisp September evening was thick with the scent of ambition and exhaust fumes. For Tom Sterling, CEO of Sterling Innovations, it tasted of victory. At 38, he had the kind of chiseled good looks and ruthless reputation that made magazine covers and terrified competitors. He hadn't inherited his empire. He had forged it from nothing but a brilliant mind, a borrowed laptop and a sleep-depriving work ethic that had incinerated his youth. His company was on the cusp of revolutionizing renewable energy with its next-generation heliostat technology, and tonight was the culmination of 2 years of relentless globe-trotting negotiations. The deal was with Sheikh Khalid Al Jamil, the venerable head of the Saudi Arabian Royal Investment Authority. This wasn't just about money. The $300 million was, of course, transformative, but the Sheikh's backing was a seal of approval that would catapult Sterling Innovations into the stratosphere, silencing a chorus of Wall Street doubters. A failure tonight would be catastrophic. It would be perceived not as a stumble, but as a fatal flaw in Tom's leadership. The vultures were always circling. He strode into Aria, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, only a discreetly monogrammed oak door. The interior was a symphony of hushed tones, dark wood, and recessed lighting that made every table feel like a private world. Tom's world tonight consisted of a corner table with a panoramic view of the city lights, a view he wouldn't even notice. His team was already there. Robert Vance, his seasoned CFO, and a nervous young translator named Michael. "Are they here?" Tom's voice was low and clipped, dispensing with pleasantries. 5 minutes out," Mr. Sterling, Robert said, adjusting his tie. "Traffic on the FDR." Tom's gaze swept the room, his mind a whirlwind of contractual clauses, currency exchange projections, and counter-arguments to any possible objection the Sheikh might raise. His eyes flickered past the staff, moving with quiet efficiency. He registered them as he might register the well-oiled hinges on a door functional present and utterly unimportant. One of those functional parts was Isabella Rossi. To the patrons of Aria Isabella was a model of professional grace. Her uniform was immaculate, her movements fluid, and her smile, though faint, was always ready. She refilled water glasses before they were half empty, and anticipated needs with an almost supernatural intuition. But beneath the polished veneer was a story of profound loss. Just 4 years ago, Isabella wasn't serving tables in New York. She was studying political science and comparative literature at the prestigious University of Damascus. Her father had been a celebrated diplomat, a man who believed in building bridges through language and culture. Their home in Syria was filled with books in a dozen languages, and the air hummed with intellectual debate. Arabic, her mother tongue, was a language of poetry and history. French was the language of her schooling English, the language of global affairs. She spoke all three with the effortless fluency of a native. Then the war came. It didn't arrive with a formal declaration, but with the slow, terrifying creep of chaos that stole friends, then neighbors, then hope itself. Her world, once a vibrant tapestry of culture and promise, was shredded in a matter of months. They fled with nothing but 2 suitcases and the ghosts of the life they once knew. Her father, a man of words and peace, did not survive the stress and heartbreak of exile. Her mother, now frail and haunted, lived with her in a cramped queen's apartment that cost more than their entire Damascus home. The job at Aria was a lifeline. It was grueling, often thankless work, but it paid the bills and her mother's medical expenses. Each night she donned the uniform and locked away the scholar, the diplomat's daughter, the woman who once debated philosophy over mint tea. Here she was, just Isabella the waitress. She had learned to make herself small to be unobtrusive. She had learned that in this new world, her past didn't matter. No one cared that she could analyze 13th century Sufi poetry or debate the nuances of international trade agreements. They only cared if their steak was medium rare. Tonight, she was assigned to the corner table. She recognized Tom Sterling from the business journals her father used to read. She saw the tension coiled in his shoulders and the predatory sharpness in his eyes. He was a man accustomed to command, to having the world bend to his will. She felt a familiar pang, a mix of admiration for his success and a deep, aching nostalgia for a world where she too had a seat at the table, not just an apron to serve it. As she placed the leather-bound menus on the table, Tom didn't even look up from his phone. He simply waved a dismissive hand, a gesture that said, "You are not important right now." For Isabella, it was nothing new. It was just another Tuesday. She retreated into the shadows, a silent observer waiting for the play to begin. She had no idea she was about to be thrust into the starring role. Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil and his young aide Fahad arrived with the quiet gravitas of old money and absolute power. The sheikh was in his late 60s, with a neatly trimmed white beard and eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 desert nights. He wore a traditional thobe and gutra, a stark contrast to the sharp Italian suits of Tom's team. Fahad, his nephew and protege, was Western-educated, sharp and fluent in English, but always deferred to his uncle with deep respect. Greetings were exchanged. The translator, Michael, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, nervously facilitated the initial pleasantries. Tom, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, steered the conversation toward business. Sheikh Khalid, we are honored. I trust your accommodations at the St. Regis are to your liking. Tom began, his voice smooth as polished marble. Michael translated, and the sheikh responded in Arabic. Michael's translation back was stiff, literal. He says the hotel is adequate. He thanks you for the inquiry. Isabella, standing a respectful distance away, flinched internally. The sheikh hadn't said adequate. His words were far more poetic. He had used a phrase that roughly translated to, "It provides a comfortable perch from which to view your magnificent city." The nuance, the graciousness, was completely lost. It was like describing a sunset as the end of the day. The dinner progressed awkwardly. Tom, a master of the boardroom, found the rhythm frustrating. Every point he made had to be filtered through Michael, and the replies that came back felt stripped of all personality and intent. He pushed the wine list toward the sheikh. Perhaps a bottle of the 82 Petrus. A fine year. Sheikh Khalid politely declined with a gesture. As a devout Muslim, he did not drink alcohol. It was a basic piece of cultural knowledge, a detail Tom's expensive prep team should have drilled into him. It was a small misstep, but in a negotiation of this magnitude, small things could fester. Isabella approached to take their order. "Good evening, gentlemen. Are you ready to order, or would you like another moment?" she asked, her voice soft and professional. Tom was in the middle of a thought, frustrated by the clumsy communication. He didn't look at her. "We'll need a minute." He then turned to Robert. "This translator is a liability. His timing is off. It's killing the momentum." As Isabella began to retreat, Tom, without thinking, gestured impatiently for more water. His hand movement was too sharp, too sudden. He knocked over his own glass, sending a cascade of ice water directly onto Isabella's apron and shoes. For Tom bit back a curse, his face tightening with annoyance, not concern. He looked at the puddle on the floor, then at her soaked apron, as if she were a piece of faulty equipment. "My sincerest apologies, sir," Isabella said immediately, her training kicking in as she reached for a napkin. Tom waved her off, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's fine. Just get it cleaned up. And send someone else over, please. We need to focus here." The words hung in the air, each one a tiny, sharp barb. Send someone else over. He wasn't just dismissing her, he was erasing her. He didn't see a person who had been drenched, only a problem to be removed. The insult wasn't in the spill, it was in the utter lack of humanity in his reaction. For a fleeting second, the polished mask of the waitress slipped. A flicker of hurt, of indignant pride flashed in her eyes. It was the look of a diplomat's daughter being treated like a scullery maid. He didn't notice, of course. He had already turned back to his guests, his mind re-engaging the multi-million-dollar battle. Isabella felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. She mumbled another "excuse me," and walked quickly toward the kitchen, her squelching shoes a humiliating reminder of the encounter. Inside the steamy, clattering sanctuary of the kitchen, she leaned against a stainless steel counter, taking a deep breath to quell the sudden fierce tremor in her hands. It was the casual cruelty that stung the most, the complete and utter disregard. In that moment, he hadn't just spilled water on her. He had poured contempt on the quiet dignity she fought so hard to maintain every single day. She wasn't a human being to him. She was a function, and she had just malfunctioned. Her manager, a stern but fair woman named Claire, saw her expression. "You okay, Rossi, table 12, giving you trouble?" "No, it's fine. Just an accident." Isabella lied, grabbing a dry cloth. "I can handle it." She refused to be chased off her station by a rich man's arrogance. It was a matter of pride. Her father had once told her, "Dignity is the only possession no one can take from you, Isabella. You can only give it away." She would not give it away tonight. Wiping her shoes and swapping her apron, she straightened her back, recomposed her features into a mask of polite neutrality, and prepared to walk back into the lion's den. Back at the table, the atmosphere had grown decidedly colder. Tom, trying to recover from the wine faux pas, launched into the technical specifications of his solar array technology. He spoke with passion and precision, outlining the efficiency gains, the patented energy storage system, and the projected output. Michael, the translator, was struggling to keep up. Technical jargon about photovoltaic cells and molten salt energy storage was a world away from the simple conversational Arabic he was comfortable with. He started to stammer his translations, becoming shorter, less confident. Sheikh Khalid listened patiently, stroking his beard. After Tom's 10-minute monologue, the sheikh began to speak. He spoke not to Michael, but directly to Tom, his gaze steady and intense. He spoke for several minutes in flowing, complex Arabic. His tone was calm, but there was an undercurrent of steel. Everyone at the table turned to Michael. The young man swallowed hard, his face paling. He says he has some concerns. Michael began wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. He is worried about dust. The sand. In the desert. Tom frowned. Dust. We've accounted for that. Our automated cleaning systems are state-of-the-art. They use electrostatic repulsion and minimal water perfect for the desert environment. Tell him that. Michael relayed the message, his words clumsy and lacking conviction. The sheikh responded immediately, his voice taking on a sharper edge. He used a series of phrases and idioms that were deeply rooted in Bedouin culture and poetry. Michael looked utterly lost. Sir, he's talking about the loyalty of the wind and the memory of the sand. I don't understand. It's a very specific dialect. Robert Vance, the CFO, leaned in his voice a low growl. What do you mean you don't understand? You're a translator. It's not standard Arabic. Michael whispered frantically. It's poetic, metaphorical. I can't give you a literal translation, because it won't make sense. Sheikh Khalid stopped speaking and looked at them, his silence more damning than any accusation. He knew the boy was failing. Fahad. His nephew shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a look of deep concern on his face. He knew his uncle well. This was a test. Sheikh Khalid valued not just numbers and technology, but wisdom, respect, and the ability to understand the heart of a matter, not just its surface. He was testing their depth, and they were failing spectacularly. Tom's blood ran cold. He could feel the $300 million deal, the culmination of his life's work, slipping through his fingers like fine sand. The momentum wasn't just killed, it was being buried alive. Just translate what you can word for word, Tom hissed at Michael. Sir, he said something like, a mirror that cannot reflect the whole sky is worthless, no matter how clean you keep it. It doesn't make sense. It was then that Fahad, the nephew, intervened, speaking in perfect, unaccented English. Mr. Sterling, if I may. My uncle's concerns are not merely technical. He is speaking of the soul of the project. He fears that a design born in a New York skyscraper cannot truly understand the nature of the desert. The wind, the sand. They are not just engineering problems to him. They are living, breathing elements of our home. He is asking if your technology has respect for the land it will inhabit. Tom was floored. This was a cultural chasm he had no idea how to cross. His entire pitch was based on logic data and ROI. He was trying to sell a machine, but the sheikh was trying to understand its spirit. Sheikh Khalid spoke again, a final quiet statement in Arabic, and then placed his hands on the table, a gesture of finality. Michael translated weakly. He says, perhaps this is not the right partnership. Panic seized Tom. The deal was dead. It was dying right here on a Tuesday night in a ridiculously expensive restaurant, all because of metaphors about wind and sand. His empire was crumbling before his eyes. The room felt like it was closing in the quiet chatter from other tables, sounding like a roar in his ears. He looked at Robert, who was ashen-faced. He looked at the sheikh, whose calm expression was a mask of profound disappointment. He had failed. And standing just a few feet away, arranging silverware at an adjacent table, was Isabella. She had heard every word. She understood the poetry. She understood the sheikh's dialect. She understood the loyalty of the wind and the memory of the sand. And she understood with chilling clarity that the mirror the sheikh spoke of wasn't the solar panels. It was Tom himself. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct, every fiber of her being screamed at her to stay invisible. This was not her fight. The man at the center of this disaster was the same one who had looked through her, dismissed her, humiliated her. Why on earth should she help him? Helping him meant exposing herself, breaking the cardinal rule of her job and risking immediate termination. Losing this job would be devastating for her and her mother. She watched Tom Sterling's face, the mask of supreme confidence now cracked, revealing a raw, desperate fear she recognized. It was the look of someone watching their world crumble. She had seen that look before in the eyes of her father as they packed their lives into suitcases, in the faces of her neighbors as they said their final goodbyes. Her mind was a battlefield. One side, the pragmatic, wounded side, urged caution. Let him fail. What does he deserve from you? He saw you as nothing. Let him see what nothing feels like. But another voice, a voice that sounded remarkably like her father's, spoke of something else. It spoke of bridges. Her father had dedicated his life to bridging cultural divides, to using language not as a tool, but as a key to unlock understanding and empathy. He believed that the greatest tragedies occurred not from malice, but from a failure to truly listen. And she was listening. She understood what Farhad had tried to explain, but she grasped it on a deeper level. The sheikh wasn't just being poetic. He was voicing a profound ecological and spiritual concern. He was asking if Sterling Innovations had considered the wadis, the dry riverbeds that flood unexpectedly, or the haboob, the colossal sandstorms that could swallow a city whole. He was asking if they understood that the desert wasn't an empty canvas for their technology, but a complex ancient system that demanded respect. The memory of the sand referred to the shifting dunes that could bury a structure over decades, a phenomenon that required deep generational knowledge to predict. To let the deal fail over this misunderstanding felt like a betrayal of everything her father had stood for. It was a failure of communication, the very thing she was an expert in. Could she do it? Could she, Isabella Rossi, a waitress in a borrowed uniform, step onto this global stage? The fear was immense. Her voice might shake. They might laugh at her. Claire, her manager, would fire her on the spot. She looked at Tom Sterling again. He had already lost. He had nothing more to lose. But she did. She had everything to lose. Then her eyes met those of Sheikh Khalid. For a brief instant, his gaze flickered toward her. There was no recognition, just a deep, weary sadness. It was the look of a man who had traveled halfway around the world, hoping to find a partner, only to find a salesman. That look decided it. Taking a breath so deep, it felt like it was drawn from the very marrow of her bones, Isabella took one step forward, then another. The sound of her sensible work shoes on the polished floor seemed to echo in the sudden tense silence that had fallen over the table. Robert Vance noticed her first, a frown of annoyance creasing his forehead. "We don't need anything right now," he said curtly. Isabella didn't look at him. She looked directly at Tom Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice quiet but clear, betraying none of the terror she felt inside. "Forgive me. My name is Isabella Rossi. I believe I can help." Tom stared at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Help? Help with what I told you to send someone else? You're losing this deal because you are not speaking the same language." She interrupted the words tumbling out before she could stop them. And I don't mean Arabic. Your translator is translating your words, but he is not conveying your meaning, and he cannot interpret the Sheikh's heart for you. The entire table stared at her, utterly dumbfounded. Michael, the translator, looked both horrified and relieved. Tom was speechless. This waitress, the one he had soaked with water and dismissed without a second thought, was standing here lecturing him on international diplomacy. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. "And who are you two?" he began, his voice dangerously low. But Isabella's gaze had already shifted. She turned to Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil and bowed her head slightly in a gesture of profound respect, and then she began to speak. Isabella spoke in Arabic. But it wasn't the hesitant textbook Arabic of the translator. It was the fluid, melodic, and deeply respectful dialect of a highly educated native speaker. It was the language of diplomats and poets, infused with the courtesy and nuance that the situation demanded. The effect was instantaneous. Sheikh Khalid's eyes, which had been hooded with disappointment, widened in astonishment. Fahad sat bolt upright, his jaw slack. Robert Vance and Tom Sterling could only stare their minds, struggling to process the impossible scene unfolding before them. Isabella began by apologizing profusely in Arabic for her impertinence in interrupting such an important meeting. She introduced herself not as a waitress, but as the daughter of a man who had revered the Sheikh's culture and wisdom from afar. Then she addressed the Sheikh's concerns. "Your Excellency," she said, her voice resonating with a confidence she didn't know she possessed, "the man before you, Mr. Sterling, is a man of numbers and wires. His language is that of efficiency and steel. It is a powerful language, but it is not yours. When you speak of the loyalty of the wind, he hears an engineering problem. He does not hear the voice of the jinn that our grandmothers told us about. When you speak of the memory of the sand, he thinks of abrasion coefficients, not of the ancient caravan routes that the dunes have buried and revealed over centuries." She paused, letting her words settle. The Sheikh was now leaning forward, his entire attention fixed on her. He nodded slowly, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. Isabella then turned her head slightly, addressing Tom in crisp, clear English. "Mr. Sterling, Sheikh Khalid is not questioning your technology's durability. He is questioning its wisdom. He is asking if you have built a machine that will fight the desert, or one that will live in harmony with it. The mirror that cannot reflect the whole sky is not your solar panel. It is your perspective. He feels you are so focused on capturing the sun that you are blind to the land and the world they exist in." Tom was thunderstruck. It was as if a blindfold had been ripped from his eyes. In a few sentences, this woman had illuminated the vast, dark chasm of misunderstanding that he hadn't even known he was standing on the edge of. She hadn't just translated words. She had translated meaning, culture, and philosophy. Isabella turned back to the Sheikh. "Mr. Sterling's company has spent years studying the desert's climate. Perhaps he has not used the language of poetry to explain it, but his engineers have mapped the seasonal wind patterns, the shamal and the kaus. They have accounted for the shifting dunes in the foundation's design, using deep earth anchors, inspired by the very root systems of the garf trees that hold the desert together. His cleaning system was designed not to fight the sand, but to gently persuade it to leave like a guest who has stayed his welcome." She was improvising, connecting the technical details she had overheard with the cultural metaphors the Sheikh was using. She was building the bridge stone by stone, right there in the hushed dining room. "Mr. Sterling's flaw," she continued, her gaze now bravely meeting Tom's, "is that he sees the desert as a resource to be conquered, not a partner to be respected. But his creation, the technology itself, may be wiser than its creator. It is designed to bow to the sun, to coexist with the wind, and to endure the sand. It is perhaps more respectful than his words have been. She concluded by turning once more to the sheikh. I ask your forgiveness for speaking out of turn. But I could not stand by and watch two great men from two great cultures fail to connect because they could not find a common language. She bowed her head again and stepped back, her role concluded. The silence that followed was profound. It was no longer tense or awkward. It was filled with a sense of awe. Sheikh Khalid looked at Isabella for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his wise eyes. He spoke, his voice now warm and resonant. Isabella turned to Tom, her professional composure fully restored, though her heart was still racing. The sheikh says, she translated softly, that it has been many years since he has met an engineer with the soul of a poet. He would like to hear more about these Gulf tree-inspired anchors. The deal was not just alive, it had been reborn. The rest of the dinner unfolded in an atmosphere so radically different from its beginning that it felt like a dream. The oppressive tension had evaporated, replaced by a current of vibrant intellectual energy that flowed directly from Isabella. She was no longer a ghost in the background, but the nexus of the entire conversation. At the quiet, insistent gesture of Sheikh Khalid, a chair was brought for her, placed not at the head of the table, but slightly to the side, a position that was both respectful and essential, like that of a trusted vizier. Tom watched, utterly captivated. He was witnessing a masterclass in diplomacy that no Ivy League business school could ever teach. When the conversation turned to the project's environmental footprint, the sheikh voiced a concern that was once again steeped in metaphor. A great tree that gives shade, but poisons the well beneath it, is no gift to the village. He stated, his eyes on Tom. Before Tom could launch into a defense of his company's water-neutral processing, Isabella gently raised a hand. She translated the sheikh's words, but added a layer of context for Tom. He is not accusing us of anything, Mr. Sterling. He is asking about our legacy. In his culture, a project's worth is measured not just in its immediate profit, but in its impact on the 7th generation to come. He wants to know if the well will still be pure for his great-great-grandchildren. Armed with this profound understanding, Tom's answer was transformed. He didn't just speak of filtration systems and recycling protocols. He spoke of his own grandfather, a farmer whose land had been ruined by a chemical company upstream, and how that family story was the very reason he had founded Sterling Innovations on a principle of sustainable, clean energy. He spoke with a passion and sincerity that had been absent all night. Isabella translated his story, her voice weaving his personal history into the grander narrative of corporate responsibility, making it resonate with the sheikh's values of family and legacy. For the first time, Sheikh Khalid saw not just a CEO, but a man. When the dessert plates were cleared and fragrant mint tea was served in traditional glasses, the sheikh shared stories of his own youth in the Rub al-Khali desert, describing how his tribe could navigate by the stars and the scent of the wind. It was a world away from Tom's reality of stock tickers and quarterly reports, and he listened with a new humbling sense of his own ignorance. As the evening concluded, Sheikh Khalid stood. He shook Tom's hand, his grip firm, and his smile genuine. "Mr. Sterling, you have a remarkable company," he said, and Isabella's voice gave the translation a warmth it had previously lacked. "Your technology is impressive. But tonight I have learned that your greatest asset is not your patents or your machinery." His gaze shifted to Isabella, and the respect in his eyes was absolute. "It is this young woman. Her integrity and wisdom are rarer than any precious metal. She does not just speak a language, she speaks the truth." He then addressed Isabella directly in Arabic, his tone soft and paternal. "You have your father's spirit, child. You honor his name." He gave a slight, respectful bow of his head, before he and a visibly impressed Fahad departed into the New York night. For a long moment after they left, the three of them, Tom, Robert, and Isabella, remained at the table. The silence was immense, a vacuum left by the departure of such a powerful presence. The clatter of the restaurant, which had been a dull background hum, now seemed loud and intrusive. Robert Vance, a man of numbers who was rarely at a loss for words, let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. He looked at Isabella, his face a mask of awe and disbelief. "I have been in this business for 30 years, he said, his voice hoarse. "I've sat in on deals in Riyadh, Tokyo, and Frankfurt. I have never ever seen anything like what you did tonight. You didn't just save the deal. You elevated it. You made it something more. Thank you isn't a big enough word, but it's all I have." Isabella, her composure a shield against the dizzying events, simply inclined her head. "I was happy I could be of assistance, Mr. Vance." Robert nodded, gathered his briefcase, and with a final appreciative look at Isabella and a questioning glance at his boss, he quietly excused himself. He knew this was a moment that did not require his presence. Now they were truly alone. The table, littered with the evidence of a 4-course meal, felt like a battlefield after the truce had been signed. Tom didn't speak. He rose from his chair and walked slowly to the vast plate-glass window, turning his back to her. He stared out at the glittering tapestry of the city, a view that normally filled him with a sense of ownership and power. Tonight it made him feel small. Each light represented a life, a story, a universe of experiences he knew nothing about. He had built his empire by mastering systems, predicting markets, and outmaneuvering his rivals. He treated life like a complex algorithm to be solved. But Isabella, she understood it as a poem to be felt. His entire world was one of black and white data points. She had just revealed to him an infinite spectrum of color he never knew existed. His mind reeled back not to his successes, but to a painful buried memory. He was 22, fresh out of college, with a prototype he'd built in his garage. He was in a venture capitalist's office in Silicon Valley, his hands shaking as he gave his pitch. The VC, a man of immense wealth and influence, had taken a call in the middle of his presentation, then checked his watch 3 times. At the end, he'd looked at Tom's worn-out sneakers and cheap suit and said, "Good idea, kid, but you're not one of us. Come back when you learn how to look the part." The dismissal had been so casual, so utterly devastating. It had lit a fire of ambition in him, but it had also forged an armor of arrogance around his heart. He had sworn he would never be that powerless kid again, and tonight he had become that venture capitalist. He had looked at Isabella's uniform, not the brilliant mind within it. He had judged her station, not her substance. The shame of it was a physical weight pressing down on his chest. Finally he turned around. The harsh lines of his face were softened by the dim light, and his eyes, usually blazing with intensity, held a deep, troubled vulnerability. "Ms. Rossi. Isabella." He started, his voice quiet, stripped of all its commanding boardroom resonance. I need to apologize to you, and I need to do it properly. What I did earlier tonight, spilling the water, that was a clumsy accident. But my reaction, that was a choice. It was a moment of deliberate cruelty. I dismissed you. I made you feel invisible because it was easier than acknowledging my own frustration. It was arrogant, it was ignorant, and it was unforgivable. There is no excuse for it. I am profoundly sorry. The apology was so specific, so deeply self-aware, that it disarmed her. She had expected a cursory "sorry about" before. This was a confession. She saw that the apology was not for her benefit, but for his own. It was a man trying to reconcile himself with a part of his character he could no longer stand to look at. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice even. "I accept your apology." "Please call me Tom," he said, shaking his head. "And an apology is just words. It changes nothing about what happened, what you possess. This ability to see the world through other people's eyes, to understand the heart behind the words. It's a form of genius, and I almost threw it away with the trash." He walked back to the table, his movements deliberate, his focus entirely on her. "I have spent the last hour realizing that Sterling Innovations has a catastrophic vulnerability. We have the best engineers, the best analysts, the best technology in the world. But we have no wisdom. We are blind and deaf to the very cultures we want to work with. That ends tonight." He leaned against the table, his expression one of fierce intensity. "I am not offering you a bonus or a thank you gift. I am offering you a position, a senior executive role. I am creating a new department effective immediately, the Department of International Relations and Cultural Strategy. You would be its first director. You would report directly to me. You would build your own team, set your own budget, and your first task would be to fundamentally change the way this company sees the world. Your salary will be whatever you ask for. I will not even counter." The sheer scale of the offer was dizzying. It was a rocket ship to a different life, a life she thought she had lost forever. The scholar, the diplomat, the woman of the world, he was offering her a chance to be all those things again. A wave of emotion, hope so fierce it was painful, washed over her. But her past had also taught her to be wary of sudden turns of fortune, of powerful men and their grand gestures. She held his gaze, her own, steady and clear. "Mr. Sterling, Tom, that is an extraordinary offer. But I have to be honest with you. Why are you doing this? Is this your way of easing a guilty conscience? Are you offering me this job because you feel sorry for me, or because you want to fix the mess you made tonight?" It was a direct challenge, a test. Was this an act of pity or an act of strategy? Tom didn't even blink. A wry, humorless smile touched his lips. "An hour ago, my motive would have been guilt. Absolutely. It would have been a high-priced way for me to sleep at night. But after watching you turn a dead deal into a genuine partnership, after realizing you saw a truth that my entire multi-million-dollar team missed, now my motive is pure, unadulterated self-interest. You just showed me that I'm trying to win a chess game, and you're the only person in the room who knows how to play. My company cannot succeed on a global scale without someone like you. I'm not offering you this job to be a good person. I'm offering it because I am a good CEO, and I know a priceless asset when I see one. I need you. My company needs you." His raw honesty was more compelling than any flowery promise. This wasn't a handout, it was a recognition of her power. Just as the weight of his words settled between them, his phone emitted a soft buzz on the table. He glanced at it, expecting a market update or an email from his legal team. His eyes widened slightly as he read the text message. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face, the first truly genuine smile she had seen from him. Without a word, he turned the screen toward her. It was from Fahad. The message read, "Sheikh Khalid was deeply impressed. He has one final condition for the deal. He insists that Miss Rossi be appointed as the official project liaison for Sterling Innovations. He says her presence guarantees the soul of the project will be honored. The deal is yours if you agree. Congratulations." Tom looked up from the phone, his eyes locking with hers, a newfound respect shining in them. "So it seems it's no longer just my offer," he said, his voice a low murmur that held the weight of a new world of possibilities. "It's now a contractual obligation from a sovereign wealth fund, the first order of business for the new director. What do you say, Ms. Rossi? Are you ready to manage a $300 million deal?" The taxi ride from the gilded cage of Aria in Manhattan to the quiet, tree-lined streets of her Queens neighborhood felt like traveling between parallel universes. Isabella sat in the back, the city lights smearing across the window as the driver navigated the bridge. In her hands, she clutched a simple business card Tom had given her, his personal cell number scrawled on the back. It felt heavier than a gold brick, a tangible link to the impossible reality she was now facing. The scent of expensive perfume on her uniform mingled with the faint, familiar smell of street food and autumn leaves from her own borough. The whiplash was profound. 1 hour ago, she was the linchpin in a $300 million international deal. Now she was calculating if she had enough cash for the taxi fare, or if she'd have to use the emergency credit card. She let herself into the small second-floor apartment she shared with her mother. The air was filled with the comforting aroma of cardamom and old books. Her mother Amara was asleep in her armchair, a novel resting on her lap. The television was on its volume, low, casting flickering shadows on her face, etching lines of worry that even sleep could not erase. Seeing her like this, so fragile and so far from the vibrant, confident woman who had hosted ambassadors in their Damascus home, solidified something in Isabella's heart. This wasn't just about reclaiming her own future. It was about restoring her mother's peace. She gently woke her. "Mama, I'm home." Amara's eyes fluttered open. "Isabella, my dear, it is so late. Was it a difficult night?" Isabella sat on the ottoman at her mother's feet, a position she hadn't taken since she was a child. "The most difficult," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "and the most incredible." For the next hour, she recounted the entire story. She left nothing out: Tom's piercing arrogance, the humiliation of the spilled water, the translator's panicked face, the sheikh's poetic metaphors about the desert. She described the terror she felt stepping forward, the words of her father echoing in her mind. And finally, she told her of the impossible offer and the sheikh's stunning condition. Amara listened, her hands clasped over her heart, her expression shifting from anger at the initial insult to astonishment, and finally to a deep, radiant pride that seemed to smooth the weary lines from her face. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of profound joy. When Isabella finished, Amara reached out and cradled her daughter's face in her hands. "When your father was a young attaché," she began, her voice a soft, melodic Arabic. "He was in a tense negotiation over water rights. The other side was angry, distrustful. Everyone was shouting. Your father said nothing. He simply asked the lead negotiator to tell him about his grandfather's favorite camel." Amara smiled at the memory. The man was shocked, but he told the story. And in that story of a beloved animal, your father found a shared value, a love for legacy for things that sustain life. He built his bridge from there. She looked deep into Isabella's eyes. Tonight you did not just find a common language. You found his camel, Isabella. You found the heart. Your father. Oh, he would be so proud. Not of the money, not of the title. He would be proud because you chose understanding over anger. You built a bridge, my daughter. You must cross it. That was all the confirmation Isabella needed. But she would not cross it as a supplicant. She would cross it as an equal. She did not sleep that night. Fueled by coffee and a lifetime of suppressed ambition, she sat at her small kitchen table and drafted a 2-page memorandum of acceptance. It was a document of breathtaking audacity and strategic brilliance. She accepted the position of executive director, but proposed a title change to Chief Cultural Officer, a role with C-suite authority. She outlined a 90-day plan that included a top-down review of all international communications and training protocols. She detailed the mandate for her new department, explicitly stating a hiring policy that would prioritize qualified candidates from immigrant and refugee communities, leveraging their first-hand global experience. She formally proposed the establishment of the Sterling Foundation for New Americans, to be funded by an annual 0.5% of all profits from deals her department facilitated, which would partner with non-profits to help skilled refugees get their foreign credentials recognized in the US. Finally, she included a section on executive immersion, which required all senior VPs and Tom himself to complete 40 hours of cultural sensitivity and language training within the first 6 months. She emailed the document to him at 4:15 a.m. with the subject line, Terms of Acceptance. Tom received it on his phone as he was staring out the window of his penthouse apartment, having also not slept. He read it once, then twice. He didn't feel anger or offense at her boldness. He felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated respect. This wasn't a list of demands from a grateful waitress. This was the first strategic directive from his new chief cultural officer. It was brilliant, principled, and exactly what the company needed. He replied in less than 5 minutes. His response was just 5 words. I agree to all terms. Welcome aboard. Her first day at Sterling Innovations felt like stepping onto a different planet. The lobby was a cathedral of glass and steel, the air humming with quiet, ruthless efficiency. She remembered standing in this very lobby months ago, her resume for a janitorial position in hand, only to be told by a dismissive security guard that she was overqualified and should try a temp agency. Today, that same guard snapped to attention and buzzed her through to the executive elevator with a respectful "Good morning, Ms. Rossi." The 50th floor was a world of hushed carpets and panoramic views. As Tom introduced her to the senior staff, she could feel their gazes a mixture of raw curiosity, skepticism, and a healthy dose of fear. The legend of the Aria dinner had already ripped through the corporate grapevine. They saw a poised young woman in a simple but elegant suit, but they knew she wielded an influence that had brought their fearsome CEO to heel and saved the company's biggest ever deal. Tom's introduction was brief and direct. This is Isabella Rossi, our new Chief Cultural Officer. She has my full and unconditional support. Her department is critical to our future. Listen to her. Their first one-on-one meeting was in his office. It was a vast, minimalist space that felt more like an art gallery than a workspace. Tom motioned for her to sit, but remained standing himself, looking out the window in a pose that was now familiar to her. I have a confession, he said without turning around. I started taking Arabic lessons this morning. My tutor says I have the worst accent he has ever heard. Isabella allowed a small smile. "It's a difficult language, Tom." "That's not the point," he said finally, turning to face her. "The point is, for the first time in 10 years, I'm a beginner at something. I'm uncomfortable. I'm out of my depth. It's exactly where I need to be. That's the first thing you've already taught me." He slid a black security card across the desk. "Your office is next to mine. Let's get to work." Isabella didn't just get to work. She started a revolution. Her first hires were a former economics professor from Venezuela, who had been driving for Uber, a software engineer from Nigeria, who had been working in retail, and a marketing guru from Ukraine, who had been waiting tables alongside her. They were brilliant, hungry, and saw the world with a perspective that sterling innovations desperately lacked. The partnership between Isabella and Tom became the new engine of the company. It was not a romance. It was something far rarer and more powerful. It was a symbiosis of vision and wisdom. He was the unstoppable force. She was the immovable object of principle that guided him. She would challenge his aggressive timelines, forcing him to see the human cost, while he would push her to think bigger, to apply her diplomatic skills on a global scale. 6 months after she started, as she stood looking out the window of her own corner office, she saw Tom across the glass partition in his struggling through a video call with his Arabic tutor. He looked up, caught her eye, and gave a frustrated but good-natured shrug. In that moment, Isabella understood the full scope of what had happened. The world would see a story of a billionaire who had given a waitress a fairy tale opportunity. But she knew the truth was far more complex. Tom Sterling hadn't saved her from a life of servitude. He had given her a platform, but she had seized it on her own terms. The real salvation that night at Aria had been his. She had saved him from the gilded prison of his own arrogance, from the blindness that comes with unchecked power. She had held up a mirror, and instead of flinching, he had been brave enough to truly look at his own reflection. In saving him, she had finally reclaimed herself, becoming the woman her father had always raised her to be, a builder of bridges on a foundation of her own making. The story of Tom and Isabella reminds us that the most valuable assets we have are not listed on any stock exchange. They are empathy, understanding, and the courage to see the humanity in everyone regardless of their station in life. We all have a hidden language, a unique skill, a story that is invisible to the world until we are given a chance to speak. This story isn't just about a waitress and a CEO. It's about the incredible untapped potential that exists all around us, waiting in the shadows for a single moment of connection. If this story moved you and reminded you of the power of looking beyond first impressions, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and prove that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one you notice least. What happens when a man who can buy anything tries to silence a woman who has nothing? This isn't just a story about a waitress and a billionaire. It's about the moment a dismissive, arrogant tycoon, a man used to the world bending to his will, made one simple, brutal demand of a young woman just trying to earn her living. In this country, you speak English. He expected her to crumble. He expected fear. What he got instead was a reply so shocking, so impossibly fluent in 5 different languages, that it didn't just stun him into silence, it unraveled his entire empire. Stay with us to hear the incredible true story of Ilara Vance. Ethelgard's wasn't just a restaurant. It was a theater of wealth on Manhattan's Upper East Side. The air itself seemed expensive, thick with the scent of white truffle vintage leather and the quiet, confident murmur of old money. For the patrons, it was a sanctuary. For the staff, it was a gilded cage where they moved like silent ghosts, their individuality scrubbed away and replaced by a crisp black uniform and an unwavering smile. Among these ghosts was Ilara Vance. To the casual observer, she was just another waitress, efficient, quiet, and possessing a kind of serene grace that made her seem almost invisible, a perfect cook in Ethelgard's flawless machine. She was 24, but a weariness in her deep green eyes made her seem older. Her movements were precise, born of a discipline that seemed out of place among the clatter of silver and porcelain. Her colleague, a bubbly and perpetually stressed waitress named Chloe, often joked that Ilara could carry a tray of champagne flutes through a hurricane without spilling a drop. "You're a machine, Elle," Chloe whispered one Tuesday evening as they polished wine glasses behind the service bar. "I swear you don't even breathe the same air as the rest of us mortals." Ilara offered a small, sad smile. "Just focused, Chloe. You know how Marco gets." Marco, the restaurant's manager, was a man whose spine was made of jelly and whose temperament was dictated by the size of a customer's tip. He orbited the floor with a perpetual cringe, terrified of offending the titans of industry who treated Ethelgard's as their private cafeteria. And there was no titan more fearsome than Damien Blackwood. The name was spoken in hushed tones among the staff. Blackwood wasn't just rich, he was a force of nature, a corporate raider who had built Blackwood Industries from nothing into a global behemoth. He was ruthless, sharp-tongued, and notoriously impatient. He dined at Ethelgard's 3 times a week, always at table 7, a secluded corner booth that offered a commanding view of the entire room. He demanded perfection and treated the staff not as people, but as extensions of the furniture. "He's coming in tonight," Marco announced during the pre-service briefing, his voice trembling slightly. "Table 7, 8 p.m. sharp. He's hosting a potential partner from France. I want everything, and I mean everything, to be flawless. Ilara, you're on his section. You're the only one I trust not to crack." A collective sigh of relief went through the other waiters. Serving Blackwood was a trial by fire. He would send back a steak if it was a single degree over medium-rare complain, if the ice in his water melted too quickly and his glare could curdle cream. Ilara simply nodded. "Of course, Marco." Inside, however, a familiar knot of ice tightened in her stomach. It wasn't just Blackwood's temper that unnerved her. It was him. The sight of his face, the severe jaw, the cold, calculating blue eyes, the perfectly tailored suits that cost more than her yearly salary, was like a physical blow. Each time he walked into the restaurant, it was a ghost from a past she had fought desperately to bury. A past of unimaginable privilege and even more unimaginable pain. She had once lived in his world. She had attended galas in rooms grander than this spoken to world leaders and never once worried about the price of anything. That life had been shattered, burned to the ground by betrayal and scandal. Her family name Vance, once synonymous with philanthropy and integrity, was now a toxic whisper in the circles Blackwood frequented. Her father, Robert Vance, had been his mentor, his friend, and Damien Blackwood had been the architect of his downfall. Now here she was, Ilara Vance, the heiress in exile, reduced to serving the very man who had destroyed her family, stolen their legacy, and left her with nothing but a new name and a desperate need to remain invisible. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a survivor, hiding in plain sight, and tonight she was about to serve her monster. as the clock ticked closer to 8 p.m. Elara meticulously checked table 7. The silverware was aligned with military precision. The crystal glasses were so clean, they seemed to disappear. She took a deep, steadying breath, smoothing down her apron. She was no longer Elara Vance, daughter of Robert Vance. Tonight, she was just a waitress. She had to be. Her survival depended on it. At precisely 8:20 p.m., the heavy oak doors of Ethelgard's swung open. Damien Blackwood strode in, not so much walking as conquering the space before him. He was a man in his late 40s, his dark hair lightly dusted with silver at the temples, radiating an aura of raw, unapologetic power. Behind him trailed a shorter, older gentleman with a kind face and impeccably styled grey hair, who looked slightly overwhelmed by Blackwood's pace. This was Monsieur Dubois, the French investor. Marco scurried forward, bowing and scraping. "Mr. Blackwood, a pleasure. Your table is ready." Blackwood didn't even glance at him, his eyes scanning the restaurant with an air of bored ownership. "Of course it is." He led his guest to table 7, settling into the booth and immediately pulling out his phone. Elara watched from the service station, her heart hammering against her ribs. Be invisible. Be a ghost. She picked up 2 leather-bound menus and a bottle of sparkling water plastered on her professional smile and approached the table. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Ethelgard's. May I offer you some water to begin?" She asked, her voice calm and even. Blackwood didn't look up from his phone. "Still. And make it quick." Monsieur Dubois, however, offered her a warm smile. "Bonsoir, pour moi de l'eau gazeuse, s'il vous plaît." "Good evening. For me, sparkling water, please." Without missing a beat, Elara replied in flawless, Parisian-accented French. "Bien sûr, monsieur. Un excellent choix." "Of course, sir. An excellent choice." She turned to fill his glass from the bottle she was holding. For the first time, Damien Blackwood looked up. His eyes, cold as a winter sky, narrowed on her. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. He clearly hadn't understood the exchange and hated being on the outside of anything. Monsieur Dubois was charmed. He continued in French, "It is a delight to hear my own language spoken so beautifully. You are French?" "My family has roots there, sir," Elara replied smoothly, still in French. "I am glad to make you feel at home." Blackwood slammed his phone down on the table. The sound made Marco, hovering 10 feet away, jump. "Enough?" Blackwood's voice was a low growl that cut through the restaurant's ambiance. Heads at nearby tables turned. "I am conducting business here, in America, with an American company." He fixed his piercing gaze on Elara, his lip curling in a sneer. "You will speak English. Only English. Is that understood?" The condescension in his tone was suffocating. He didn't see a person. He saw a disobedient appliance. Monsieur Dubois looked embarrassed, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "Damien, please, she was only being polite." "I don't pay for polite, Jean-Luc. I pay for service." Blackwood snapped his eyes, still locked on Elara. "So let's try this again, from the top, in English." The world seemed to slow down for Elara. Every instinct screamed at her to apologize, to retreat, to become invisible again. It was the safe thing to do. But something inside her, a long dormant spark of the Vance pride of the brilliant, educated woman she once was, refused to be extinguished. She looked at the face of the man who had called her father brother before stabbing him in the back, the man who had stripped her of her home, her name, her future, and he was ordering her to be small. She held his gaze. The polite, vacant waitress smile vanished, replaced by a look of cool, unreadable composure. She turned first to Monsieur Dubois and spoke in his native tongue. Monsieur, je vous prie de m'excuser pour cette interruption. Votre confort est ma priorité. Sir, please excuse this interruption. Your comfort is my priority. Then she shifted her posture slightly and addressed Blackwood. But the words that came out were not in English. They were in crisp, perfect Italian, her tone as sharp as shattered glass. Signore, la sua maleducazione è pari solo alla sua ignoranza. Qui la cortesia è la lingua universale. Sir, your rudeness is matched only by your ignorance. Here courtesy is the universal language. Blackwood's jaw went slack. He stared at her utterly bewildered. He understood nothing but the defiant tone. Before he could react, she shifted again, her expression hardening. This time the words were in fluent, cutting Spanish. Quizás si tratara a la gente con un mínimo de respeto, no necesitaría exigirles que se rebajen a su nivel. Perhaps if you treated people with a modicum of respect, you wouldn't need to demand they stoop to your level. Monsieur Dubois' eyes were wide with a mixture of shock and dawning amusement. Marco looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Elara wasn't finished. She straightened to her full height, her voice now flowing in precise articulate German, a language known for its authority. Ein Mann von ihrer Position sollte wissen, dass wahre Macht nicht im Befehlen liegt, sondern im Verstehen. A man of your position should know that true power lies not in commanding, but in understanding. By now, a stunned silence had fallen over the surrounding tables. Everyone was staring. Damien Blackwood, the master of the universe, the man who silenced boardrooms with a single word, was being verbally dismantled by a waitress in 4 languages he couldn't comprehend. His face, usually a mask of cold control, was a canvas of pure, undiluted fury and humiliation. Finally, Elara looked him directly in the eye. She leaned in, just slightly, her voice dropping to a calm, clear, and impeccably enunciated Oxford English, the kind of English spoken in the halls of power he so desperately admired. But of course, Mr. Blackwood, you are the customer and you demand English. So in English, I shall be happy to take your order. Or would you perhaps need a few more moments to compose yourself? The sting of her final perfect English sentence was the most potent blow of all. It wasn't just a reply. It was a declaration. She hadn't just spoken. She had shown him that his world was small and hers was vast. The waitress he had tried to humiliate was in that moment entirely his superior. And in the dead silence of the opulent dining room, Damien Blackwood had no idea what to do. The silence that followed Elara's multilingual tour de force was deafening. It stretched for what felt like an eternity. Damien Blackwood's face had cycled through a spectrum of emotions. Shock, rage, and now a deeply unsettling, calculating stillness. His mask of control was back in place, but the fury behind his eyes burned hotter than ever. He had been publicly outmaneuvered, his authority shredded by an employee he wouldn't have recognized on the street a half hour ago. Without a word, he pushed his chair back, the legs scraping violently against the marble floor. He threw his napkin onto the table. Jean-Luc, we're leaving. Monsieur Dubois, looking both mortified and deeply impressed, began to protest. Damien. Wait, she was remarkable. Now. Blackwood commanded his voice, a low threat. He stalked towards the exit, not looking back. Monsieur Dubois gave Elara a final apologetic glance before hurrying after his host. The moment the doors swung shut behind them, the restaurant erupted in a flurry of whispers. Elara stood frozen by the table, her adrenaline starting to fade, replaced by a cold dread. She had won the battle, but she was certain she had just lost the war. Her job, her anonymity, her carefully constructed safe haven, it was all about to vanish. Marco rushed over his face, pale and beaded with sweat. "What have you done?" he hissed, his voice trembling with fear and anger. "Are you insane? That was Damien Blackwood. He could buy this entire city block and turn it into a parking lot just to spite us." "He was rude, Marco," Chloe said, appearing at Elara's side, a look of awe on her face. "He deserved it. That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen." "Incredible? She's fired. That's what's incredible." Marco sputtered, wringing his hands. "Elara, my office. Now." As Elara walked across the dining room, she could feel every eye on her. But one pair of eyes held a different quality. They belonged to an elderly gentleman sitting alone at a small table by the window. He was impeccably dressed in a tweed jacket, with kind, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He hadn't been whispering. He had been watching the entire exchange with a keen, analytical interest. As Elara passed, he met her gaze and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of approval. The gesture was so small, yet it sent a strange shiver of validation through her. Inside Marco's cramped office, the lecture was as predictable as it was frantic. He paced back and forth, ranting about profit margins, reputation, and the wrath of Damien Blackwood. "I have no choice. I have to let you go. Your final paycheck will be mailed. Please just clear out your locker and leave quietly." Elara simply nodded. She had expected this. "I understand, Marco." There was no point in arguing. She had known the consequences. She changed out of her uniform in the staff locker room, her hands shaking slightly. Chloe found her there. "Don't worry about this, Elle," Chloe said, her voice fierce. "Any restaurant in New York would kill to have you." "That was legendary. You're my hero." "Thanks, Chloe," Elara said, managing a weak smile. But as she walked out the back door into the cool night air, the reality of her situation hit her. She was jobless, with barely enough money for next month's rent. Blackwood now knew her face. Her invisibility was gone. What if he decided to dig deeper? What if he discovered who she really was? The fear she had kept at bay for so long came rushing back. Meanwhile, in the back of his chauffeured Maybach, Damien Blackwood was silent, staring out at the blurred city lights. The humiliation gnawed at him. It wasn't just that a waitress had defied him. It was the way she had done it, with an intellectual and cultural superiority that he couldn't buy or bully. It was a language of the world he didn't speak, and it infuriated him. He pulled out his phone and made a call not to his driver, but to his head of security, a ruthless former Mossad agent named Kael. "Kael," Blackwood's voice was dangerously calm. "I have a task for you. The waitress at table 7 at Ethelgard's tonight, the one with the green eyes. I want to know everything about her. Her name, her address, where she was born, what she had for breakfast this morning. Everything. And I want it on my desk by morning." He hung up. This wasn't about getting a waitress fired anymore. This was about power. He needed to understand the weapon that had been used against him. He needed to know who she was. He had a feeling, a cold premonition in the pit of his stomach, that she was more than just a waitress. And Damien Blackwood hated surprises. Back on the street outside the restaurant, Elara clutched her worn coat around her and began the long walk to the subway. As she turned the corner onto a quieter side street, a calm voice spoke from the shadows. "That was an extraordinary display, Miss Vance." Elara froze her blood, turning to ice. Vance? He had used her real name. She spun around to see the elderly gentleman from the restaurant stepping out from a doorway. He had a gentle smile, but his eyes were sharp and missed nothing. "Who are you?" Elara asked, her voice tight with alarm, taking a step back. "How do you know that name?" "My name is Alistair Finch," he said, extending a hand which she ignored. "And I knew your father. Robert was one of my dearest friends. I was his lawyer and his confidant for over 20 years. Elara stared at him, her mind reeling. Alistair Finch? The name was familiar, a relic from a buried life. He was the one who had tried to fight for her father, the one who disappeared after the trial, after everything was lost. "I've been looking for you for 3 years, Elara," Alistair said, his voice soft with sympathy. "Ever since you vanished. I never believed for a second what they said about your father. And I know who was behind it all." He gestured back towards Ethelgard's, where the lights still glowed warmly. "You just served him dinner," Alistair said, his voice grim. "And tonight you did something I've been trying to do for years. You got under Damien Blackwood's skin. You made him lose control. And in doing so, you may have just given us the opening we've been waiting for." He pulled a simple white business card from his pocket. "He will come for you now. Not to fire you, but to understand you. When he does, you will be ready. Call me. It's time to stop hiding, Elara. It's time to fight back." He pressed the card into her hand and melted back into the shadows, leaving Elara standing alone on the sidewalk, the small piece of cardstock in her palm, feeling as heavy as the keys to her entire past. The sun rose over Manhattan, but Damien Blackwood hadn't slept. He sat in his penthouse office, a glass cage overlooking Central Park, the city sprawling beneath him like a kingdom he had conquered. On the polished obsidian surface of his desk lay a single file delivered by his security chief, Kyle, an hour earlier. The file's cover was stark white, bearing a single name, Elara Vance. He had expected to find a history of a struggling immigrant, perhaps a student working her way through college. He had anticipated a simple, easily digestible story that would explain her linguistic talents and quell the burning humiliation from the night before. What he found instead was a ghost. He opened the file. The first page was a photograph, a professional headshot from 3 years ago. The young woman in the picture was smiling, her green eyes bright with a life and hope he had not seen in the tired waitress. Her name was listed as Elara Annalise Vance. Date of birth, May 12th, 2001, place of birth, New York, New York. And then the line that made the air in the room grow cold. Daughter of Robert and Eleanor Vance. Blackwood felt a jolt, as if he'd touched a live wire. Vance. It couldn't be. He read it again, his mind racing, connecting the dots with the brutal efficiency that had made him a billionaire. The hair, the eyes, the aristocratic poise she had displayed even in a waitress uniform. It was all there. It was her, the daughter of the man he had destroyed. He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning in the silent room. A flood of memories long suppressed rushed to the surface. He saw Robert Vance not as the disgraced felon the world remembered, but as the man he had been, brilliant kind, a titan of ethical investment and philanthropy, who had taken a young, hungry Damien Blackwood under his wing. Robert had been his mentor, his champion, the closest thing he'd ever had to a father. Business is about building. Damien. Not just acquiring. Robert used to say, his voice full of warmth, as they stood on the construction site of a new community center funded by the Vance Foundation. You build wealth, yes, but you also build communities. You build futures. That is the real legacy. Damien had admired him. He had even loved him in his own way. But admiration had curdled into envy. Robert's vision was about legacy. Damien's was about power. He saw Robert's philanthropy not as noble, but as a weakness, a diversion of funds that could be used for aggressive expansion. He saw Robert's trust as a vulnerability to be exploited. The betrayal had been a masterpiece of corporate warfare. It was slow, meticulous, and utterly devastating. Over 2 years, Blackwood had created a shadow network of shell corporations. He had siphoned small, untraceable amounts from the Vance Foundation's international accounts, rerouting them through a labyrinth of offshore entities before funneling them into a single account in the Cayman Islands, an account opened in Robert Vance's name using forged documents. The final move was to orchestrate an anonymous tip to the SEC. He had manufactured a paper trail that painted Robert as a hypocrite and a thief, a man who preached charity while secretly embezzling millions for himself. The evidence was circumstantial, but expertly crafted. Blackwood, as Robert's trusted protégé and COO, was the one who tearfully discovered the final damning piece of fabricated evidence. He played the part of the heartbroken disciple, forced to expose his fallen idol. The trial was a media circus. Robert Vance, a man renowned for his integrity, was crucified. He maintained his innocence, but the web Blackwood had woven was too intricate. He was convicted of fraud and embezzlement. His reputation was shattered, his fortune frozen, and his company, Vance Global, was left vulnerable. With the company teetering on the brink of collapse, Damien Blackwood, the hero who had uncovered the truth, stepped in. Using his own rapidly growing capital, he initiated a hostile takeover, buying up the company for pennies on the dollar. He absorbed its assets, its technology, and its charitable foundation, rebranding it all under the Blackwood Industries umbrella. He had not just defeated his mentor, he had consumed him, erasing his legacy and writing his own over it. Robert Vance died in prison less than a year later. The official cause of death, a heart attack. The world said it was a weak heart, broken by shame. Blackwood knew it was a strong heart, broken by betrayal. Robert's wife, Eleanor, had succumbed to illness shortly after, and their daughter, Elara, the brilliant young linguist who had been studying at the Sorbonne in Paris, had simply vanished. Blackwood had assumed she had taken what little money was left and disappeared broken and defeated. He had been wrong. She hadn't run. She had hidden. She had burrowed into the heart of his city, taking a menial job, living a life of anonymity, right under his nose, for 3 years. A cold, terrifying thought crept into his mind. Was it a coincidence? Had she simply ended up at his favorite restaurant by chance? Or was this something more? Was she hunting him? The defiance in her eyes last night. It wasn't just an angry waitress. It was the righteous fury of a daughter defending her father's memory. Blackwood stood up and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. The waitress was no longer a puzzle. She was a threat, a loose end from the most ruthless chapter of his life, a chapter he thought was closed forever. She was a living reminder of the one thing he feared, the truth. He had built his empire on the ruins of her family. He had taken everything from her, and now she had taken something from him, his peace of mind. He turned back to his desk, his decision made. He couldn't crush her like he would a normal business rival. That would be too noisy, too suspicious. He couldn't have her disappear. That would draw attention. No, this required a different strategy. The one Robert Vance himself had taught him long ago. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. He picked up his phone and dialed his personal assistant. "Catherine, get me Ethelgard's on the line. I want to speak to the manager." No, on second thought, cancel that. He paused, a cruel, brilliant plan forming in his mind. Find the home address of the waitress from last night. The one Kyle investigated. Her name is Ilara Vance. I'm going to pay her a visit. I have a job offer for her. He would bring her into his world, into his company. He would control her, watch her, and if necessary, break her completely. He would turn the ghost of Robert Vance into his own prized possession. Ilara spent a sleepless night on the lumpy couch in her tiny fourth-floor walk-up apartment in Queens. The business card Alistair Finch had given her sat on the rickety coffee table, a stark white rectangle that represented either a lifeline or a trap. The name Vance, spoken aloud after so many years, still echoed in her ears. Her carefully constructed anonymity was gone. The morning brought with it the harsh reality of her situation. No job-dwindling savings, and the looming shadow of Damien Blackwood. She spent hours online researching Alistair Finch. The search results confirmed everything he'd said. He was a highly respected corporate lawyer, known for his fierce loyalty to his clients. He had defended her father with a passion that bordered on obsession, and then, after the verdict, had quietly retired from his high-profile firm, disappearing from public life. He was a man of integrity, a man her father had trusted implicitly. Finally, her hand shaking, she dialed the number on the card. Alistair answered on the first ring. "I was hoping you'd call Ilara." His voice was a calm anchor in her sea of anxiety. She told him everything about losing her job, about the constant fear, about the suffocating weight of hiding for 3 years. "You were never hiding, my dear," Alistair said gently. "You were surviving. There's a difference. Your father would be so proud of the strength you've shown." Hearing those words, a dam inside her broke, and she wept for the first time in years for her father, for her mother, for the life that had been stolen from her. Alistair listened patiently. When she was finished, his tone became serious. "Blackwood's investigation will have finished by now. He knows who you are. He will not see you as a threat to be eliminated, not yet. He will see you as an unknown variable to be controlled. He will make a move, likely something bold and unexpected. He'll want you where he can see you." "What do I do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "For 3 years I've been gathering evidence against him," Alistair explained. "I have financial records, sworn affidavits from former Vance Global employees he forced out. But it's all circumstantial, just like the evidence he used against your father. We are missing the final piece, the smoking gun, something from inside his inner circle, something that directly links him to the initial fraud. We need a key to his kingdom." A knock on her apartment door, loud and firm, made her jump. "Someone's at my door," she whispered frantically into the phone. "Stay calm, Ilara." Alistair's voice was steady. "This is it. This is his move. Whatever he offers you, however he frames it, your answer must be yes. You need to become the key." Her heart pounded as she peered through the peephole. She didn't see a hulking security guard or a process server. She saw Damien Blackwood himself, standing in the dingy hallway of her building, looking utterly and dangerously out of place in his bespoke suit. She took a deep breath, ended the call with Alistair, and opened the door. Blackwood's eyes swept over her small apartment, taking in the peeling paint, the second-hand furniture, the stack of books on linguistics and history by her bed. It was a look of profound, arrogant pity. "Quite a fall from the Sorbonne, Miss Vance," he said, his voice smooth as venom. He didn't wait for an invitation, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "What do you want?" Elara asked, her voice steely. She refused to let him see her fear. "I admire talent," he said, circling her living room like a predator casing a den. "And what you did last night, while wildly inappropriate for a waitress, was a remarkable display of talent. A wasted talent." He stopped in front of her, his presence seeming to suck all the oxygen from the room. "I'm a man who collects rare and valuable things. Art companies people. Your linguistic ability is a rare commodity. I have a proposition for you." Elara remained silent, her expression a mask of neutrality, just as Alistair had coached. "I am expanding Blackwood Industries into several new international markets," he continued. "Russia, China, the Middle East. It requires delicate negotiations, a deep understanding of culture and language that my current team lacks. I need a special advisor, a personal translator who can move between these worlds seamlessly. The position comes with a 6-figure salary, a corporate apartment in my own building, and access to resources you can only dream of." He paused, letting the offer hang in the air. It was a golden cage, beautifully constructed and designed to imprison her. He was offering her a pale imitation of the life he had stolen from her, a life where her talents would serve his ambition. "Why me?" she asked, her voice level. A smirk played on his lips. "Let's call it a gesture of goodwill. Perhaps your father's situation was more complex than it appeared. Perhaps I feel a certain responsibility for the daughter of my former mentor." It was a lie, a manipulative twisting of the knife, and they both knew it. He was testing her, seeing if she would break, if she would accuse him. This was the moment. Alistair's words echoed in her mind. Become the key. She had to swallow her rage, her grief, her hatred, and play his game. She met his gaze, her green eyes holding his for a long moment. Then she gave a slow, deliberate nod. "You want to hire me for my language skills, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Very well. I accept your offer." Damien Blackwood smiled a cold, triumphant smile. He believed he had won. He had found the ghost that haunted him and put her on a leash, turning her into another one of his prized possessions. He had no idea that he had just willingly handed his greatest enemy the keys to his kingdom. The waitress was no longer a waitress. She was a Trojan horse, and she had just been welcomed inside the gates of Troy. The transition from a cramped queen's apartment to a sleek, minimalist corporate apartment on the 50th floor of Blackwood Tower was dizzying. One day, Elara was counting tips to make rent. The next, she was looking down on the city from a window that seemed to span the horizon. The apartment was furnished with cold, expensive taste, all chrome glass and black leather. It felt less like a home and more like a beautifully appointed prison cell. A golden cut, just as she had imagined. Her new role as special advisor and personal translator to Damien Blackwood thrust her into the very heart of his empire. Her desk was situated in an office adjoining his own penthouse suite, separated only by a pane of smart glass that he could turn from transparent to opaque at the touch of a button. She was always on display, always under his watch. The first few weeks were a relentless test. Blackwood paraded her like a new acquisition. In a video conference with German industrialists, he would gesture to her impatiently. Elara, tell them their profit-sharing proposal is an insult, but do it in a way that sounds like a compliment. She would seamlessly translate his brutal demands into diplomatically nuanced German, smoothing over his abrasive style and often salvaging the deal. During a tense negotiation with a Russian oligarch over oil futures, she caught a subtle mistranslation by the other party's interpreter, a single word that changed the liability clause by billions of dollars. She corrected it quietly in flawless Russian, earning a rare, fleeting look of genuine surprise from Blackwood. She played her part perfectly. She was diligent, efficient, and emotionally detached. To Blackwood and his executive team, she was an enigma, a linguistic prodigy with a mysterious past utterly devoted to her work. They saw her talent, but were blind to her purpose. Every night after the long days of navigating corporate shark-infested waters, she would return to her silent apartment and report to Alistair. "He's arrogant," she told him over an encrypted line. "His entire system is built on the assumption that no one is smart enough to challenge him. The security is focused outward to stop corporate espionage from his rivals. He's not looking for a threat on the inside." "That's our advantage," Alistair's voice crackled back. "The evidence we need is a digital ledger. I call it Project Nightingale. It was a shadow accounting system your father suspected Blackwood was using even before the takeover. It would detail the initial siphoning of funds from the Vance Foundation. It's the source code of his original sin. If it still exists, it will be on his central server, likely hidden behind layers of encryption." Elara's mission was clear. She had to find Project Nightingale. She began to use her unique position to her advantage. Her job required her to have high-level clearance to access documents for translation. She started by staying late, citing the need to prepare for an upcoming meeting with Japanese investors. Under the guise of studying financial reports, she began mapping Blackwood's server architecture. She used her knowledge of languages to her advantage, exploring files in different languages that other employees would overlook. One evening, while translating a series of old internal memos from Spanish, she found a reference to a server migration project from 5 years ago, right around the time of the Vance global takeover. The project leader was Blackwood's chief technology officer, a man named Gavin Thorne. The memo mentioned a legacy data preservation protocol for a defunct philanthropic asset, the Vance Foundation. This was her first real lead. Getting to Gavin Thorne was impossible. He was intensely private and fiercely loyal to Blackwood. So Elara targeted his deputy, a junior programmer who was struggling to learn Mandarin for a new project in Shanghai. Elara, coincidentally, met him in the company cafeteria and offered to help. Over several tutoring sessions, she subtly steered the conversation towards server security and data archiving. Feigning technical ignorance, she asked him innocent-sounding questions about how one would find very old, heavily encrypted files. "The old man is paranoid," the programmer grumbled one day, frustrated with a piece of code. "He keeps the really old stuff on what we call the Ethelgard server. It's a ghost server air-gapped from the main network. You can only access it physically from the terminal in Thorne's office or, well, from the boss's personal console in the penthouse." The penthouse, the lion's den itself. An opportunity presented itself a week later. Blackwood was hosting a lavish dinner for a delegation from the United Arab Emirates. He needed Elara present to translate. The dinner would be held in the main entertaining area of his penthouse residence, 2 floors above their offices. "I'll need you on call for the entire evening," he commanded. "Stay in the penthouse study. Don't wander." As the party began, Elara was escorted to the study, a magnificent room lined with rare books. and in the corner on a massive mahogany desk sat Damien Blackwood's personal computer terminal. It was the console the programmer had mentioned. Her heart pounded. This was her chance. She had an hour, maybe two, while Blackwood was occupied with his guests. She had a small USB drive given to her by Alistair, containing a sophisticated decryption program. She sat at the desk, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She bypassed the initial security layers using a password she had guessed weeks ago. Vance, 98. The year Blackwood had first joined her father's company. The arrogance of it made her sick. She was in. She navigated to the ghost server, the so-called Ethelgard server, named after the very restaurant where her new life had begun. And there it was, a single file cloaked in layers of heavy encryption, named simply Nightingale. She inserted the USB drive. The decryption program began its work lines of code, scrolling rapidly down the screen. The progress bar moved agonizingly slowly. 10%, 25%, 50%. Suddenly she heard voices approaching the study. Blackwood's laugh, low and commanding, echoed from the hallway. He was coming back. Panic seized her. The progress bar was at 78%. She couldn't abort the transfer now. She had to create a diversion. Thinking fast, she scanned the room. Her eyes landed on a crystal decanter of whiskey on a nearby table. She grabbed it, rushed to the door, and as Blackwood and one of his guests reached the threshold, she tripped, sending the decanter crashing to the floor. Amber liquid and shards of crystal sprayed across the expensive rug. "Oh my God! Mr. Blackwood, I am so sorry," she cried, feigning panic and clumsiness. "I was just going to get you a glass of water, and I stumbled." Blackwood looked from her to the mess on the floor, his face a mask of pure annoyance. "Clumsy girl," he snarled. "Get one of the house staff to clean this up, and get out of my sight. Go back to the office. I'll call you if I need you." "Yes, Mr. Blackwood. I'm so sorry," she stammered, backing out of the room. As he turned his attention to his guest, grumbling about the incompetence of his staff, Elara glanced back at the computer screen. 99%. 100%. Transfer complete. She pulled the USB from the port with a trembling hand, just as a cleaner was summoned. She had it. She had the smoking gun. She had walked into the lion's den and stolen his most valuable secret right under his nose. Now all she had to do was get it to Alistair before the lion realized he'd been robbed. The next 48 hours were the most agonizing of Elara's life. She sent the encrypted file to Alistair immediately using a secure drop, but she still had to go into work and face Damien Blackwood, pretending that nothing had happened. She had to sit in her glass office, translating contracts and fielding calls, while Alistair and his team of forensic accountants worked frantically to decrypt and verify the contents of the Nightingale file. Blackwood was more volatile than usual, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. He seemed to sense that something was amiss, a shift in the power dynamic he couldn't quite identify. His cold blue eyes would often rest on Elara, searching, probing, as if trying to see past the facade of the efficient employee to the enemy within. On the third day, the call came. It was a single pre-arranged text message from Alistair. "The Nightingale is singing. It's time." It was a full confession in numbers. The file contained the original untampered records of the Vance Foundation's accounts, showing the small, systematic withdrawals. It also contained a separate ledger detailing exactly where that money was moved through Blackwood's shell corporations, and finally, a log of the deposits into the forged Cayman Islands account. It was the entire roadmap of his betrayal. Alistair had already forwarded the package to trusted contacts at the Department of Justice and the Wall Street Journal. The fuse had been lit. That afternoon, Elara was summoned to Blackwood's office. The smart glass was opaque. When she entered, she found him not at his desk, but standing by the vast window looking down at the city. The atmosphere in the room was electric with tension. "The server logs from my penthouse study show an unauthorized data transfer 2 nights ago," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He didn't turn to look at her. A very large file, heavily encrypted, was copied from a partitioned ghost drive, the drive I call Ethelgard. Elara's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. "I wouldn't know anything about that, sir." "Wouldn't you?" He turned around slowly. In his hand was a single sheet of paper. He held it up. It was a printout of the surveillance log, showing her login credentials accessing the server. "It seems your password was used, Ms. Vance." He knew. The game was over. "It was a fitting name for the server, don't you think?" she replied, her voice steady, all pretense gone. "The place where the waitress you underestimated began the end of your empire." A flicker of shock crossed his face, quickly replaced by a sneer. "You have nothing. A stolen file. It's inadmissible. My lawyers will bury you in litigation until you're old and grey." "It's not about a court case anymore, Damien," she said, using his first name for the very first time. The sound of it from her lips seemed to physically wound him. "It's about the truth. The Wall Street Journal will be publishing their front-page story in about 20 minutes. The SEC has already convened an emergency hearing. The DOJ is preparing a warrant. Your board of directors is currently in a meeting I imagine you weren't invited to." He stared at her, the color draining from his face as the reality of his situation crashed down on him. He had been so focused on the legal battle, he hadn't anticipated the public evisceration. "Why?" He whispered the single word, full of disbelief. "I gave you everything back. The money, the status." "You gave me a cage," Elara shot back, her voice ringing with the repressed fury of 3 years. "You offered me trinkets after you stole my family's legacy. You destroyed my father, a man who treated you like a son, all for this." She gestured at the opulent office the city below. "For a kingdom built on lies. You didn't just steal his company, you stole his name. And that is what I'm taking back." His face contorted in rage. He took a menacing step towards her. "You little—" At that exact moment, the doors to his office burst open. 2 stern-faced individuals in dark suits, followed by several uniformed officers, strode in. One of them held up a badge. "Damien Blackwood," the lead agent said, his voice booming in the silent room. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering." Blackwood looked from the agents to Elara, his expression one of utter impotent fury. The master of the universe was trapped, his power vanishing like smoke. As they placed him in handcuffs, his eyes met Elara's one last time. In them, she saw no remorse, only the cold, hard realization of defeat. She walked out of the office past the stunned faces of the executive assistants and didn't look back. She took the elevator down to the ground floor, stepped out of Blackwood Tower into the bright afternoon sun, and for the first time in years, she felt truly free. The fall of Damien Blackwood was swift and spectacular. The Nightingale file was irrefutable. His empire crumbled, his assets were seized, and the truth of his betrayal was laid bare for the world to see. More importantly, the Vance name was cleared. Robert Vance was posthumously exonerated, his story rewritten from one of shame to one of tragedy and honor. Elara, with the help of Alistair, used the restored family assets, not to rebuild a corporation, but to relaunch her father's true legacy, the Vance Foundation. She became its public face, its driving force. Her linguistic skills were no longer a hidden weapon, but a powerful tool for good. She traveled the world negotiating aid packages in fluent Arabic in refugee camps, securing educational grants in Mandarin in rural China, and championing human rights in Spanish at the UN. She became everything her father had hoped she would be, a builder of futures. She had taken the worst moment of her life and turned it into her greatest strength, proving that true power isn't about how loudly you can demand to be heard in one language, but how deeply you can connect with people in many. Elara Vance's story is a powerful reminder that strength isn't always loud. It can be the quiet dignity of a waitress, the hidden knowledge of a scholar, or the unyielding love of a daughter. Damian Blackwood believed his wealth made him invincible, but he forgot that true power lies in character, intelligence, and the courage to speak the truth no matter what language it's in. Elara didn't just get justice for her father. She reclaimed her own identity and turned a weapon of hate into a tool for healing across the globe. What did you think of Elara's incredible journey? Was her revenge justified? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of hidden heroes and justice served. Thank you for watching.